neither rain, sleet, hail, fire at Union Station kept you all from coming in, which I think is a testament to the importance of what's going to be taking place in Tunisia over the next couple of weeks. So very happy to have you here. My name is Scott Carpenter. I'm a principal at Google, working with a new team at Google called Google Ideas. And Google Ideas, we bill ourselves as a think/do tank, which is basically interested in seeding initiatives that bring creative, innovative thinking together with technology to address some of the world's toughest challenges. And so we're looking at things as disparate as violent extremism, the role that technology is playing both to radicalize and to address the problem of radicalization, looking at failed and failing states and why it is that when everything else is falling apart, technology and the telecom sector seems to work, and what we can make of that. We're also looking at issues related to freedom of expression and closed societies and how technology can help information pass both to and from such places. And then we're also looking at the ways in which technology can improve governance, which is something that I would love to have an opportunity to speak perhaps later with our panelists. But today, obviously, we're focusing on, by the way, I think I still am, a board member of the Project on Middle East Democracy, which is the capacity and hat I'm wearing right now. Before joining Google, I was working at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, where I was focused on the Middle East. Regrettably, I'm not as focused on the Middle East as I was then, but still have a great deal of interest in Tunisia. Have written about the fact that from a policy perspective, it's really important that the United States and Europe look at getting Tunisia right first, because I think that there are many, many things that can be done there, and to have that transition be successful is important for the entire region. So today we're going to be talking about the upcoming elections and how important they are. But before I introduce our panelists, I just want to call your attention to the guide that has been published by POMED today and released and has been out in the foyer for you to collect. It is an amazingly useful publication. And I really want to congratulate POMED on putting it together. I don't think there's any other place, including a number of the institutions that should have this sort of document. They don't have it. And it's a real testimony to Daphne. Where's Daphne? Daphne, congratulations. This is an amazing publication. So please tweet about it, put it on your Facebook page, get it out there so that everybody knows that it's available, because I think it's a great one-stop shop for learning everything you need to know about the upcoming elections in Tunisia. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to just have one or two introductory comments. But first, we're going to hear from Mongi. Forgive me if I butcher it. Boughzala. He's a professor of economics at the University of Tunis and holds a PhD from the University of Minnesota. He focuses on monetary economics, macroeconomic policy, and labor economics. He is a research fellow at the Economic Research Forum and a board member of the Forum Euro-Méditerranéen des Instituts des Sciences Économiques. As we all know, the economy in Tunisia is suffering quite a bit after the transition, so I have a feeling his comments will be focused on the economy and what we can help do about it. Second, we will hear from Chiheb Ghazouani, an attorney at law, and he is the vice president of the Tunisian organization Afkar, meaning ideas, which is something I'm very interested in, and perhaps we can find ways to cooperate, which analyzes the political and economic programs of main political parties. This is the most important part of it's not just the election that takes place today or tomorrow, but what happens the day after the election and what these parties do. Chiheb holds a PhD in e-commerce law, has taught contracts law at the Sorbonne University in Paris, where he worked as a lawyer. He is currently teaching corporate and tax law at Tunis University and has authored a book as well as many articles and publications, and has presented at several conferences and meetings on the issues of governance and transparency, also an issue near and dear to my heart. And then finally, we're going to be hearing from Steve McInerney, who almost everyone here knows, but he is POMED's executive director and previous director of advocacy at POMED. He has developed a great deal of experience in the Middle East, speaks fluent Arabic, and is a graduate of the School of Foreign Service here, as well as the American University of Beirut and American University in Cairo. Steve has done a remarkable job leading this organization forward, and we're very happy that he's been able, and this organization has been able, to cooperate with so many around the region during this time of immense political and economic upheaval. So we're going to hear from Mongi first, Chiheb second, and then Steve. And I just wanted to say by way of introduction that these elections, the fact that these elections are taking place is a really remarkable thing. And the electoral system that Tunisia has adopted is also a remarkable electoral system in the sense that it is designed to be as representative as possible. It's designed to be equitable to those regions of the country that have been forgotten for so long. It is designed to ensure that there is parity, or as close to parity as possible, between men and women participating in the parliament. It is a remarkable system that has evolved. The political party law that has allowed parties to form has been done with transparency in mind, and with an attitude of being as inclusive as possible, rather than forcing people to wait to participate. There's been an absolute explosion of political activity, civil society organizations being formed. It is a tremendously exciting time in Tunisia, and as we watch it, the systems that have been put in place, I think, give Tunisia one of the, in terms of any other country in the region, the best opportunity of success. It's no guarantee of success, of course, but the fact that these systems are in place and that they are as transparent as they are, and that people are looking forward to participating as much as they are, is all a positive sign. But ultimately, it's going to be what the political leadership in Tunisia does afterwards that will matter. So I look forward to hearing from our panelists about their thoughts on the current situation, and look forward to the discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mongi.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to speak about what's happening in Tunisia, about the outlook, about the elections. Scott already gave you a very good summary. I'll try to talk a little more about what's going on. As you know, I suppose all know that on Sunday, October 23rd, the Tunisians are going to elect their Constituent Assembly. This is a major historical event for Tunisia and for the whole region. It's an extremely important day for us, and its success is going to determine the transition to democracy for Tunisia and for the region. Because it's the very first time we have fair and democratic election. And we have been preparing for it, and we think it's going to work as far as the election process is concerned. This is happening after about 60 years, or more than 60 years, of autocratic regime, and more than 20 years of corrupt, destructive, Ben Ali government. And for a lot of people, and including for us, it's been a surprise. What happened on January 14th, a little before, was a surprise. But when we really think about it, it's not that much. I mean, it's also a logical evolution of things, because the country was in a situation where something had to happen. I mean, the situation was such that in this small country, which is Tunisia, about 10 million, very few people talked about it. It didn't excite that many people before, and maybe it's not exciting as it should be. Tunisia, which has many features, contradictory, and it's characterized by its high education level for men and women. It's modern, it's open, it's highly Westernized. Certainly it belongs to the Arab and Muslim group of countries, but it's deeply entrenched in the Mediterranean and very close to the Western world. So it's a very open country. And at the same time, we have this autocratic regime. And we had, although a growing economy, were leading to us to a medium income country, we had a lot of unemployment. We had these hundreds of thousands, and that's a lot for Tunisia, of young people who are unemployed, although educated. Most of these young people have gone to school. And the majority of the educated have gone at least to high school. Close to half of them have been to college. And they are more than exasperated. So given that, given the corruption, given the aspirations, given the unequal development among regions, given the hidden poverty that hasn't been talked about, this situation could not last very long. People are sick and tired, especially of corruption, because it has become so obvious. Okay, so it was explosive, and it had exploded somehow. I mean, Benazir gave the starting point, but it's objectively a necessary thing. And people expressed their willingness for change, for profound change. When in the beginning we had the government that wanted to just organize new elections to elect new president and do just a few changes in the constitutions to make it happen, it didn't work. People, and when I say people, it's the majority, especially young people, but not just young people, everybody joined. The majority decided that we want real change. First of all, it means democracy, and a genuine democracy, not just elections. Institutional reforms, more justice, more dignity, more jobs for the youth, and a better life for everything. So people want a real democratic regime. And this is not just a speech. It's not just words. And we have decided not to choose the easy way. I mean, to go through the hardship, to take risks. And we are taking risks, because for the moment we don't have a solid government. We have stopped working with the previous constitution and previous institutions. And a lot of things are not going very well. But that's a choice, because to achieve deep change, you need to take risks. And that meant, in particular, that the country had decided not to just make small changes, but to go for a new state, for a new regime, for a new constitution, and therefore for electing the Constituent Assembly, whose role is, first of all, to write a new constitutions, and then, meanwhile, to govern the country. I mean, which means appoint a president and a cabinet. Given this, we have some good news, but also a lot of challenges and many risks. Let me tell you a little bit of the good news, because it takes quite a bit of time, but I will go very quickly. We think that the election will go quite smoothly. I don't mean perfectly, but we have been planning for it for at least 9 months, 7 months, I'm sorry. And for that, an independent authority or commission was created for that, which has it's independent and trusted. And this is very important. And it has been working on that for the 7 months, appointing and electing local commissions, training people, preparing for everything that should be done to make sure that the election is done according to international fair standards. So this is one of the good news. And they are coordinating with the security system. I mean, because we need security, which has to be neutral. And we also need organization. And this is going quite well. The country has managed, in spite of all the chaos, to function. I mean, most of the major institutions have never been out of order. I mean, we always had water, electricity, transportation. People go out, maybe once in a while. We have some the unrest, but that doesn't mean that life has stopped. I mean, people can travel, everything, which is still, I mean, an achievement. We have this substitute parliament, which has been formed and managed to write some major pieces of legislation, including the law on the election, which Scott has talked about. And we didn't have it before. So there are many signals that show that there are good news. And the creation of the independent commission in charge of the election is a very important thing. One of the other good news is that we know that at least all major parties have expressed their commitment, their engagement, their willingness to do it fairly and to accept the outcome of the election no matter what they will be. And this is very important. 11 out of the more important parties also signed some sort of roadmap describing how things will be organized on day 2. In particular, defining the role of the Constituent Assembly. And that's quite important because this assembly is going to start from scratch with zero regulation. So we have, these are examples of points of good news, and they mean that the election will go pretty well. We are not very afraid of the outcome of the election or of the election process. However, as I said, we do have a lot of challenges. Nothing is guaranteed. I cannot mention all of them, but let me mention a few of them. Maybe the most important. The first one is the uncertainty. The uncertainty due to the fact that we have so many parties, too many candidates. I mean, the political system is exploding, and for the moment has produced more than 100 parties. 1,400 lists competing for the 250 seats or so. In one district, you may find 60 or 70 candidates. You know, that sounds, and it is confusing. And it's making life not so easy for the majority who is not particularly educated or involved in the political system. So this is true. But we shouldn't be very afraid of it, because when you look at it more closely, it's not as bad. Because, in fact, you don't have real 100 effective parties. You only maybe a dozen of them matter. Also, most of them haven't even have candidates. And when you look even closer, you notice that most of them belong to some very homogeneous groups. Maybe the most important are the Social Democrats. And someday we think they're going to make a coalition. And they have declared it many times. They said, we are not ready right now, but after the elections, we'll do it. So we have 3 or 4 groups, as a matter of fact. We don't have 1,000 types of ideas, even though there are nuances and there are debates and people like to argue. But we hope that after the election, things are going to be much simpler, and the map, the landscape is going to be much easier to understand. So people are confused, but we think that's not a major problem. Hopefully, it's going to be clearer in a few weeks. Well, some people are also worried about what Ennahda, the Islamist party, will be doing, and what is its role and in its weight. I mean, this is, of course, an important feature, an important dimension, Islam. There is a debate about the role of Islam, to what extent it matters. But what we are sure of, that the majority, the very large majority of the Tunisian are secular. Not that they're not Muslims, but they're secular. Those who insist on linking government and the state to religion are certainly not more than 10 to 15%. Ennahda is their leading party. There are some who are more extremists. But because Ennahda is very organized, it may get even maybe 25% of the seats. Nobody really knows, but this is the most plausible estimate. But 25%, that's not everybody. I mean, you've got 75% left. And the Islamists are, from now on, part of the landscape. We have to do with it. And, and it's not a real threat. The real challenge is to make sure that those who are not Islamists, those who are secular, organized in sustainable parties and civil service, organizations. So given this fragmentation, we have a challenge, but we shouldn't be absolutely afraid of it. Nevertheless, I mean, there is a fear, there is a danger that the National Council will be locked, will have trouble getting organized, it may take some time to get organized. No, I mean, there are roadmaps, there are some tentative plans, but there is a real challenge in any case, and nobody can really know. How to manage expectations is the second and maybe a major challenge. Expectations are considerable. People have waited for a long time. Many people think that just after the elections, they're going to get what they wanted. Of course, it's not true. I mean, given the expectation, nobody can meet them immediately. So there's going to be a need to manage this expectation. Something has to be done. Jobs have to be created, at least enough to appease and to satisfy the the emergencies. We have to do a lot more spending. We have to be careful with the fiscal balances, but I mean, we have to find the good trade-off, the good compromise between meeting the aspirations and maintaining stability, especially macroeconomic stability and fiscal stability. This is a major challenge, but it all depends on the robustness and the seriousness and the cohesion of the government that is going to come. People want really a new change, not only politically, but also economically. And reforms, a new type of economic model. This is something that is really raising a lot of hope. And it's not going to be implemented right away, but there's at least a lot of agreement on the main features. People agree that from now on we want faster growth. We want more investment. We want to create the investment climate. We want to create better institutions, install the rule of law, reform all the major institutions in a way that guarantee the rule of law to better, and that means the judiciary, the fiscal system, the administration, the fiscal administration. The agenda is huge. But the good news is that most people are aware of that. They understand what it means. Most parties that are there have put in their platforms and all of these features. The current government, the current transition government has prepared also a platform where all these features are expressed and explicit. So we know what is to be done. And we know that people want that. We know that youth may be asking for even more. They want justice, they want dignity, they want more freedom, they want real transition, they want jobs. And what is happening around all over the world is just another way to say it. We know it's going to take time, and this is the major challenge. But the main thing is to get started, to put an institution and a government that can create the trust and the confidence. And this is our major, but it needs what it needs, cohesion. I mean, fighting, I mean, democracy, multiple different points of views. We don't want one party, only one way to look at things, but also a minimum level of cohesion and understanding. And this is our main challenge. So I will end with this. So what we need is good leadership, cohesion, credible and sustainable political institutions, and we rely on us, but also on our friends, because support your interest, understanding that this is important for Tunisia and for the rest of the world, would help a lot. And thanks for listening. And I'll be very glad to.
Thank you, Mongi. Chiheb.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you all for being here. Tunisia, thank you. As you know, Tunisia was the first Arab country to make its democratic transition. And it was a peaceful revolution. Tunisia is today very important to all the region, and it will serve as a model to all Arab and Muslim countries. Today, all autocratic Arab regimes are fearing this wave of freedom that starts from Tunisia. And the last reforms in Morocco and women's right to vote in Saudi Arabia are a direct consequence of the Tunisian revolution. Tunisia is a model, is an example to other countries in Maghreb and in Middle East. So we are here to demonstrate that democracy is possible in Arab and Muslim countries. So let me remind you that Tunisia and USA have some common historical achievements. For example, the first treaty between USA and Tunisia was signed in 1799, few years after the independence. Like USA in the American continent, Tunisia was the first Arab and Muslim country to abolish slavery in 1849, and the first Arab and Muslim country to adopt a constitution in 1861. And after the independence, Tunisia opted for republicanism and abolished its monarchy. So there is a Tunisian exceptionalism in the region. Tunisians cherish certain values that they believe will perpetuate. The main values are related to women's rights. Tunisia is the only Arab country where polygamy is forbidden, where women are equal to men, where the Code of Personal Status promulgated in 1956 guarantees women's rights. Tunisia is also or was the unique Arab country in 1966 to propose a peace treaty between Israel and Palestinians. And that's why Tunisia was banished from Arab League for proposing a peace treaty between Israel and the Arabs, while Arabs were doing war to Israel. So, in one word, Tunisians are open-minded, are tolerant. Let me give you a summary of the parties and the coalitions competing in the next election in Tunisia. So we have in Tunisia more than 100 parties. That's a lot. But mainly two groups, conservatists and progressists. Conservatists are mainly the Islamic parties and their allies. On the other hand, we can find progressists or secular parties who are mainly social democratic parties. But there is an exceptionalism in Tunisia, even when we talk about Islamists. In Tunisia, Nahda, the main Islamic party, embraces market economy. They are for a parliamentary regime. They also declared that they will never remove the Code of Personal Status that grants equality between men and women. So they are presenting themselves as a modern, open-minded Islamist, maybe like the Turkish ones. On the other hand, secular parties, even leftists ones, are also in favor of the market economy. They can differ on the role that should have the government in regulating the economy, in providing employment in the public sector, but they are all in favor of a private investment for the market economy. In the next elections, in the next Constituent Assembly, secular parties are expected to form a coalition. Maybe we may have a national unity government with some Islamists in this government, but secular parties are expected to win the elections. Now, let me talk about the image that the USA has in Tunisia. So, in Tunisia, there is no skepticism toward USA help and support. All parties agree that USA can make a positive role, even Islamic ones, by helping Tunisian economy to return to growth. We all know that USA supported the Tunisian revolution. That's not the case of France. France supported former President Ben Ali till the end. That's neither the case of Canada. Canada is now hosting the crooks of the presidential family, and Canada refused to the Canadian Tunisian to vote in Canada. So we have now a good image of the USA, maybe thanks to WikiLeaks. We saw from WikiLeaks that the former president had bad press in the USA. So in general, Tunisians have a favorable view of the United States and would like to see a stronger relationship between the two countries. Anti-American sentiment is much less common in Tunisia than in other Arab countries such as Egypt. As in Egypt, USA supported Mubarak till the end. That's not the case in Tunisia. France supported Ben Ali, but that wasn't the case of the USA. So all parties in Tunisia, Islamist and secular, leftist and liberal, want a stronger relationship between USA and Tunisia. So let me try to address the question, this question: what should the United States do to support Tunisians' democratic transition? I think that the USA should express public support for the significant steps toward democracy in Tunisia, showing confidence in the transitional process in Tunisia. But I emphasize that USA should always keep a neutral position toward Tunisian parties. USA should support democracy in Tunisia and not one party or another. I think that USA should support and continued support and training to civil society organizations in Tunisia. USA should encourage investment in Tunisia, not by giving money. We are not here to raise funds. We don't want short-term aid. We want real investment. We want American factories set up in Tunisia. We want why not a possible trade agreement between Tunisia and the USA. We want USA to facilitate access of the Tunisian students to American universities. I heard yesterday that Peace Corps were reestablished in Tunisia. That's a good news because Peace Corps can help teaching English in Tunisia. So my own father was taught English by Peace Corps professor in the 60s. So he has a good image of America thanks to his Peace Corps teacher, English teacher. I think that the USA should also support a direct air and maritime line between Tunisia and America. I emphasize on education. Education is very important. We are seeking to establish an American university in Tunisia. That's very important. There is an American university in Beirut, there is an American university in Cairo, but that's not in Tunisia. Why? So it may increase the number and scope of educational exchanges between the two countries and encourage programs of teaching English in Tunisia. So if I can summarize all of my talk in one word, let me say hope. Thank you all.
Steve.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Before I begin, I can say a little bit about Chiheb and Mongi's visit this week. I was in Tunisia for 2 weeks in August, and I was meeting with a lot of civil society organizations there, including research institutions and NGOs that both Chiheb and Mongi are involved with, and we're excited to bring them here. They're here for 1 week, and they're returning to Tunis next week, and we'll be back in time for the elections. And they've had a very good visit this week. They've had opportunities to meet with high-ranking officials at the State Department. They're meeting someone from the National Security Council today, USAID, and a lot of key offices in Congress. I think there's been a sort of real lack, sort of insufficient attention in Washington on what's happening in Tunis, which is quite historic, as both of them sort of mentioned. Of course, Tunisia is where the uprisings of the Arab Spring this year began, but unfortunately, it seems to have largely been forgotten. That was part of our motivation at POMED for we're trying to do what we can to correct that by bringing them here from Tunisia, by holding this event today, and also putting out this guide, which Scott mentioned, which hopefully you all got a copy of, which my colleague Daphne McCurdy did a really fantastic job of putting together. We were talking about putting together this guide as Daphne and our other staff began, trying to do research and to put this together. It was shocking how little information there is in the American press and in English language press or publications in general about Tunisia and about what's going on this year. The elections are tremendously important. I'd say that the elections a week from Sunday are going to be the most important elections the Arab world has ever had, but they've been quite severely overlooked. I think the New York Times has had 10 articles on Tunisia this year, something like that. They've had approximately 10 per week on Egypt throughout the entire year. And so there's quite a disparity there. And I would say that in many respects, I think these elections are quite pivotal and quite, in some sense, more important for Tunisia's transition than I think the elections in Egypt are going to be for Egypt's transition, or at least the initial elections. In Egypt, I think it's sort of natural to make some comparisons between these two countries that, with only 28 days apart, the long-ruling dictators were forced to step down by popular revolutions. Since then, Tunisia has really progressed in many ways that Egyptians and Egyptian activists would like to have. A lot of the Egyptians that we know and work with are quite jealous of where things are in Tunisia. And in Egypt, you have a sort of heavy-handed military council that's been in charge of the country since President Mubarak stepped down. In Tunisia, that's not the case. In Tunisia, you have a somewhat weak civilian, technocratic government that's in place that I think is genuinely just trying to get to the elections and try to turn things over to legitimately elected constituent assembly that will write a constitution and kind of start the next chapter of Tunisia's history. In Egypt, you have the military council really trying to steer the transition in a way that protects their own power. And in Tunisia, the folks that are sort of managing the transition don't really have power to protect, and so they're just genuinely trying to get to elections. So I think it's really exciting to see what's going on in Tunisia. When I was in Tunisia in August, I was sort of struck that I've had the opportunity to spend time both in Egypt and in Tunisia, both before and after the revolution, and I was sort of struck by the difference. I see everything going on in Tunisia as extremely positive and exciting. But the Tunisians don't necessarily see it that way. There's lots of anxiety, lots of pessimism, and I think in many respects it's quite healthy. Where this transition to democracy is a very long, difficult road, and I think in Tunisia there's been sort of a mature understanding of that difficult road. To sort of again make a comparison, I think in Egypt, when President Mubarak stepped down on the 11th of February. The country seemed to celebrate that for months and not really think too much about, the general population has been very happy that that happened. They've been praising the military for helping make that happen. And the military has largely continued to rule as they did in the past since then. And the population in Egypt is a little bit relaxed. Just got a little anecdote of kind of different attitudes in Egypt and Tunisia. On my visit to Egypt since the revolution, if you ask people in Egypt, just anyone you run into anywhere, what do you think of the revolution? And everyone in Egypt, almost unanimously, their initial reaction is, "Oh, the revolution, the Saudara, it's amazing. It's we're so proud. It's the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. We never thought this would happen." And then, if you ask further questions, maybe they'll have some concerns. But there's this real elation, which you can understand the reasons for. I visited Egypt before Tunisia, and I was sort of surprised when I came to Tunisia. I'd ask people the same kind of question: "What do you think of the revolution?" And by far the most common response was, "Well, we hope it will turn out well, but we're not sure yet." And I think this sort of cautious, kind of mature understanding of the difficulties that lie ahead has positioned Tunisia much better than in Egypt. There a lot of the things tangibly that the political activists and in Egypt would like to see are the case in Tunisia. The political parties in Tunisia are much more cohesive. They're really organizing. I was very impressed when I was there that there were, the political parties were really campaigning. They were going door to door. They were kind of behaving as political parties behave, which isn't always pleasant. They were insulting each other, and there's negative campaigning, and some were sort of taken aback by that. But it seemed like real politics, as in Egypt, hasn't really been the opportunity to really focus on the elections because they're still caught up with kind of ebb and flow. The military and the SCAF is sort of continuing to interfere with things, and there's been more violence. So it was from my perspective kind of inspiring to see Tunisia is really kind of focused on these elections, and parties were behaving as parties do. And to me that was something exciting to see. Although some of the Tunisians that weren't used to that were sort of not seeing it in the same way. I'll follow up a little bit on what Chiheb was just saying about the opportunity for the U.S. to play a positive and supporting role, and I think there's sort of a unique opportunity in Tunisia. I mean, it's everything that he was just saying about there being a positive image of the United States in Tunisia. I think is accurate and quite unique in the Arab world. I mean, I think we're it's quite, again, if you compare with Egypt, there's all kinds of controversy and accusations about U.S. interference, and on all sides, the military accusing the NGOs of being supported by the U.S. and the Islamists accusing the secularists, and the military, and others accusing the military, which of course they do get lots of support from the U.S. And in Tunisia, if anything, one of the big concerns was that the United States and the international community at large had sort of forgotten them. And so where in most of the other Arab countries, there's a feeling that, we don't want Western intervention, we don't want U.S. involvement. And in Tunisia, there was a sense that, we want a stronger relationship and we want support. And we sort of had promises of it in January. We were the toast of the world for about 2 weeks. And then since then, we've sort of been forgotten. And, with Egypt and Libya and Syria going on, and we're progressing along, and we're making better progress than we're seeing anywhere else in the Arab world. But we do want be a kind of strengthen our position in the international community and strengthen our relations, and especially with the United States. And so I think I'd like to see more attention here in the U.S. I'd like to see more effort by the U.S. government to really strengthen that relationship and take advantage of the fact that it's welcomed in Tunisia in a way that it's not in a lot of other places. One part of that, as well, as to sort of expand on something that Chiheb said, the U.S. appears quite good in Tunisia, especially by comparison with the French, and that's something I heard quite frequently when I was there. Is that the French, of course, there's a long-standing close relationship between France and Tunisia. And France played things, very badly when the revolution erupted in Tunisia. The French foreign minister made comments about, that the French would perhaps send police to help train the Tunisian police or help support them to put down the protests. Those comments actually led to the French foreign minister being fired after the revolution was successful. And those things are certainly not forgotten about. And comments that Secretary Clinton made several days before President Ben Ali stepped down. She said that the U.S. wasn't going to take sides in what was happening. This was actually more than a week before he was forced to step down. And in a lot of the Western press, this was sort of seen as, lack of support for the revolution and such. And actually in Tunisia, people seem to perceive the U.S. not taking sides as them sort of abandoning their long-term ally, Ben Ali. And the French were clearly taking sides. They were on the side of the government. And the U.S. was viewed as sort of having backed off and not supported, the President Ben Ali that we'd worked with on, issues such as security and counterterrorism for a long time. And so remarks that were criticized here by some were actually perceived there quite positively. Let me say a few words about some of the challenges with the upcoming elections, which there certainly are. I would begin with, there's some, lack of clarity. I mean, I think there's a lot of positive things, and Scott mentioned some of the, positive things about the electoral system that's put in place. But, as quickly as this has come about, it's rather complicated, and so a lot of the Tunisians are confused about exactly what it is they're voting for. And, a National Constituent Assembly is, it's not something they're familiar with, and they don't know exactly, and there have been some polls that show, some significant portion of the population thinking that they're voting for the president, as of several months ago. And I think there's been impressive voter education efforts, and there's improving, but there's also been lots of changes to the process. And a lot of those changes were demanded, and, there were continuing protests after Ben Ali stepped down, and a lot of that was responded to, and they set up a timetable. And, actually first they were going to have presidential elections, then they changed that, then these elections were going to take place in July, and then they were put off. There was a new independent electoral commission that was established, which was going to try to run these elections entirely and build an entirely new voter database and new registration. And they set up, a timetable for registration. And then when not as many people had registered as they hoped, they sort of extended that. And then when still not quite as many people as registered as they hoped, they said, well, even if you didn't register, now we'll change it and say that you can vote anyway using your old national ID card. And which, and I think these are all sort of positive, adaptations to make on the fly during a difficult transition, but it also kind of results in some degree of confusion over the process. There's been a mention of the number of the parties, that there's more than 100 parties that have been established. I think, and certainly it's going to be confusing when people walk into a voting booth and in their district, they have to choose, they'll have maybe 70 different lists of, with 6 different names on each list, and they have to choose one of them, and it's sort of overwhelming. It's not entirely unusual. I mean, this seems to be actually relatively common in democratic transitions for there to be lots of parties at the beginning and for that to be somewhat confusing. In terms of one risk is that I think there's not that reliable, how these elections are going to come out is rather uncertain. There's not very reliable data. In this guide that we've published, we've included the 2 most recent polls, included for the 11 parties with the most support. We've included the estimates in the 2 most recent polls that were conducted of their support. But the polling in Tunisia is not incredibly reliable. There was no public opinion polling on any political issues before this year, so there's not really a lot of experience and kind of expertise in proper methodology. So I think these polls are not necessarily that reliable. Also, all of the polling that's been done is been measuring the percentage of support nationwide. And that would be a reasonable, predictor of how the elections were going to come out if it was sort of one single nationwide district on proportional elections. But they're split up into 33 districts, and there's been no polling that kind of reflects the differences within the districts. Also, there's been no recent polling. There's a ban on polling during the campaign period. So the most recent polls that were taken were several weeks ago, and there will be no more. So no polls will reflect any shifts in support that have been a result from the campaigning that's really ramped up in the last few weeks. What all this means, among other things, is that it's very likely that a lot of the parties will get considerably fewer seats than they genuinely expect to get, and so there's some risk, and on top of that, there will be the majority of the parties that have been formed will not have any seats in the Constituent Assembly, most likely. And so, there's a question of, what is needed in order for these elections to be successful. And by successful, I think what's needed is for them to be accepted as legitimate and credible by the majority of the population. A lot of these parties that are expecting to get several seats and are going to wind up with none, are very likely to say, oh, the elections are not fair and they were rigged and against us, and that's why we didn't get any seats. I think my impression from my conversations when I was in Tunisia is that in order for the elections to be sort of universally accepted by the population, I think if all of, or nearly all of, the 10 or 11 biggest parties accept the results as legitimate and credible, then, no matter what, if there's 3 of dozen other parties that are shut out and complain, if the, 8 to 10, 12 biggest parties accept them as credible, then, I think that the elections will be accepted as legitimate, and we'll move on to kind of the next step of the formation of the assembly. And I think that's reasonably likely to happen. I think that's looking more likely now than it looked 6 or 8 weeks ago. Some of those bigger parties also will certainly probably be shocked by how few seats they get. I met with representatives of 8 or 10 biggest parties when I was in Tunisia, and I was joking with some of them that if I added up the percentages that each party told me they thought they were going to get, that it was going to add up to like 150 or 160. So inevitably, a lot of them are not going to get as many seats as they think. Since then, I think some of those expectations have sort of been tempered, and I think and some of the polling has evened out, in the last couple of months. So I think there's more realistic expectations, and there seems to be also more confidence now in the Electoral Commission. It was an entirely new body. It got a little late start in getting things organized, and in July or August, when the elections were set for to take place on October 23rd, there was a lot of concern that the Electoral Commission would not be able to run things properly. And I think the Electoral Commission was also initially very reluctant to accept any outside help. They're sort of nationalistic and wanted to do this themselves. And then after several weeks, they sort of realized that maybe they couldn't do it all themselves. And so they have been working very hard in accepting outside support from organizations like the International Foundation for Electoral Systems that's there working with them. And I think now it seems most likely, the elections will certainly not be flawless, but I expect that they most likely will meet this kind of criteria that I've laid out of being accepted as legitimate and credible by most of the major parties. In any case, I think I'll wrap up there, but I do think that it's a really exciting moment, and I think that if these elections go well, it could really set the stage for Tunisia to kind of continue to lead as an example of democratic transition for the entire region.
Thanks a lot, Steve. I hope you'll agree we've had a very interesting discussion so far, but I have lots of questions myself, but I'll forbear since we have about 25 minutes for questions from you all. So why don't we just start with questions that you have from the audience. We have a microphone here, so if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll get a mic right over here on the right-hand side.
Thank you. My name is Kinda Mohammadi. I come from Lebanon, and I work for the Arab NGO Network for Development. Thank you for all the insights. Actually, I'm very interested in hearing Dr. Mongi and Chiheb noting on the economic front that the economic issues are part of the demands, are still part of the public demands for democratic transition. And it's interesting that there's convergence on the issue of the market economy. But do you think this is still the main question? Because there's the issue between market economy and state-centered planning economy is not there anymore. It's more on what kind of market economy we want and how we want to make it work for the demands of the people. And it's very important to note that, okay, we want macroeconomic stability, we want rapid growth, we want investment, but Ben Ali did this very good. And he was hailed by all the international community and by the IMF like a few months before the revolution, that the government is very prudent in terms of its policies and is achieving very good results on this. So is there space for deepening this discussion now in Tunisia? And are political parties engaging beyond just we want a market-led economy, and discussing how we will engage different stakeholders in identifying how this market economy will work for us? And the second issue I want to question is, what's the role of the unions in all of this? Do we see a different scenery on the union front like we are seeing on the political parties? And are they engaging in public debate around economic policy? Thank you.
Excellent set of questions. Mongi, do you want to take that one?
See you there. No, nobody's saying that the convergence on market economy is all the whole thing. We mentioned a few things on which everybody agrees. That's all. I mean, there are many points that are important for which people have agreement. There is consensus about a certain number of things, including that nobody is debating whether it's going to be a market economy or not. This is just what has been said. I mentioned the fiscal discipline because it's in the future it might become a challenge because there is going to be a lot of pressure on spending. If the next government doesn't pay attention, it might lead us to a crisis or can generate too much debt. I mean, just one thing that we have to pay attention to, even though not much debate is going on that, because it's an economist's business. The economists understand that stuff better than the common politician. Now, this being said, of course, the parties are debating about what is to be done in the future. And there are different points of view, different platforms that have already been published. But I'm not going to, I cannot say what is common to all of them. But if I take the point of view which is quite predominant and the best exposed, articulated, which is has been well articulated, is the one of the more or less social democrats. I mean, people who are moderate but who focus on social issues and the need to be more fair, to create jobs, to make sure that public services are improved, to meet the needs in terms of health and education and protecting the workers and make sure that they get their rights too. I mean, if you take those, they have been able to present important ideas as to how to do it. They say we had investment but not enough, we had growth but not enough, and not the type of growth we need. We want more sustainable, more equitable. We want to make sure that it addresses the needs of the regions which had been fairly treated. We want to industrial policies to encourage investment in the more productive and more technically advanced sectors and so on. So there are quite a bit of ideas. I don't think the problem is the lack of ideas or lack of projects. What we need is just people who can come and have the credibility and the ability to implement those ideas. Unions are involved, but not as they used to in the beginning. But they are supportive of the social democrats in most cases.
Okay, we have lots of questions. I'm going to take two up front. First, Dr. Zartman, and then Mr. Latiki.
William Zartman from SAIS. The Intifada was a youth movement, and yet I understand there's no youth party. There is a generation gap in Tunisia at the present time. What is being done by the parties to incorporate the youth? And then as a second question, everybody has two questions. What's happening to Utica? I understand it's split. What's the strength of the business organizations?
Okay, before answering, why don't we take Professor Latiki's question?
Thank you. My name is Dr. Latiri. I am with the WHO. As a Tunisian, I would like to welcome my compatriots and thank them for an outstanding presentations. And as a member of the American Tunisian Association, I welcome Professor Zartman and my colleague George, former official of State Department. First of all, I would like to remember the people who died to have this revolution established in Tunisia. I think they sacrificed their life so that we can live free and practice democracy in Tunisia. I have two questions, as Professor Zartman said. The first question is a follow-up on the unemployment. I know, all of us know, that the most important element of the revolution is really unemployment, and especially the educated people who have studied 3, 4, 5, 6 years after the baccalaureate and they have been without job for many, many years. And they continue to be without jobs even after the revolutions. In addition to that, the tourism season of this year was not good, and we don't know what's going to happen next year. So again, the situation, the economic situation in Tunisia doesn't look good as of today. I would like to know what has been happening, what are the programs of the government, this government, the provisional government, as well as the next government, who, as my understanding, will be another provisional government for another period. So it seems to me that so much time is being wasted from one provisional government to another provisional government, and yet the youth are looking for jobs, and the jobs are not coming. Second, in fact, as you know, recently 30,000 youth have left Tunisia, crossing the Mediterranean, going to Europe through Italy, looking for jobs. This has never happened in the past. So really, it's very important for us to think seriously about how to address this important issue, the jobs in Tunisia.
Thank you, Professor Lettieri. I think
Okay.
that's plenty for the plate at the moment. So maybe I could ask Chiheb to take Professor Zartman's questions to the extent you can on the youth, and then ask Mongi to talk about the economic questions.
Yes, thank you. It's really a good question. Yeah, youth had a big role, a very important role in the Arab Spring in general. They are not really involved in the next elections. When we see the main political parties' leaders, they are all 70. The major 3 or 4 political leaders are 70. It's all about egos. They want to become presidents. So now youth in Tunisia are largely involved in NGOs, in associations, in think tanks. So I hope in the future they will be more involved in the political process, as no one is immortal, and the current political generation will go. That's I think that this is their last election.
Yes.
If you could use the microphone.
Okay. The question about Utica, which is the union of the bosses, I mean, let's put it this way. It's true that they have some trouble right now because their bosses, their main leaders, used to be very close to the regime and to the president. So they have some problems with respect to organization, and we also have one new business union that has formed. So there's going to be competition among them too. But nevertheless, I think the business community is very strong in Tunisia. I mean, people who've got the money, who got the capital, are very influential. They have managed to express their point of view in many ways. People are even afraid they are paying money to major parties, and they are behind the major decisions. But it's true, I agree with you that there is work to be done. Part of the institution building and reforms, it will have to be done within this type of institutions, because the country needs good partners to negotiate future programs. And we need good unions for the firms and the business, and good unions on workers. And we have good tradition, but it's true, for the moment there's a little problem, but hopefully it will be solved. Unemployment, of course, is, as I mentioned, it's the main issue, the main challenge for the country. It's clear that this government hasn't done enough. It could have done much more. It could have helped to satisfy, to take into account youth aspirations in a reasonable way. That hasn't been done. We hope that the next, interim government will do something, because that's part of the emergencies. But one has to face it. I mean, unemployment in terms of structural change will not be solved very quickly. I mean, to go from 15% or so unemployment to something more reasonable, it's going to take at least 4 or 5 years. But there is, I mean, this is one major concern, and it's going to be the first, number one concern for the next governments. So I agree with you. We have to take care of this, but not enough has been done so far. Hope if the next interim government doesn't do enough, it could lead to more trouble.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to the back of the room, or middle of the room. We have this young woman here on the left, and then back to Dan Broomberg in the very back.
My name is Anam Rahim. I'm with Vital Voices Global Partnership. My question has to do with the role of women in Tunisia's transition, how they've been included, and on the flip side, how they've been marginalized, and what's being done to ensure that women will have a voice in Tunisia's transition and Tunisia's future.
And Dan?
Thanks very much. I'm afraid I missed the beginning of the presentation. I hope I'm not going to repeat something that has been said. I was in Tunisia for about a week recently, and I got to say that as soon as you go into the countryside, you face a different Tunisia. The divide is quite remarkable. And the young people in the countryside, the relevancy of the politics, it seems mostly like a theater. And they seem at a great deal of remove from these realities. It's somewhat disconcerting when you meet the young people on the ground. And that also applies to this whole question of the Constituent Assembly. Very much interested in hearing from Mr. Chiheb about how he sees the role of the Constituent Assembly, how it's going to get its job done, particularly in light of the debates regarding its role in the last 6 weeks. Constituent assemblies don't have a great record historically. In fact, they're not always the best way to create constitutions. So how do you see the modalities, the procedures? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? That's the basis for an entire event, I realize, but I'd appreciate your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Why don't we take one more question? Yes, sir, right here, right behind you.
Jim Fippard, former USAID director in Tunisia and recently and former president of the American Tunisian Association. I think the focus on elections is certainly very appropriate, but I agree with the previous speaker that one has also to focus on what happens afterwards. And the great concern is that a multi-party constituent assembly could break down in political fighting and backbiting and so forth. And my sense of the temper of the Tunisian people is that they would not stand for that for too long. And I'd appreciate a comment.
Okay, so Chiheb, I think the first two questions directed at you, and we can take comments from whoever wants to add anything else.
Thank you. So, considering the role of women in Tunisia, so we have traditions in Tunisia. We have high rates of educated, well-educated women. Most of judges in Tunisia are women. Most of judges, professors in Tunisia are women. So we have tradition, and I'm not afraid for women's rights in Tunisia. Even the Islamic parties say that they will keep the code of personal statutes. Tunisia is the only country that where polygamy is banished, and it will always be. So I'm pretty confident on women's rights in Tunisia. In the business world, there are many women who are leading big companies, such as Microsoft Tunisia is led by women. So I'm pretty confident. There's no problem with women's rights in Tunisia. We won't go back. So as to rural regions, it's a real problem in Tunisia, as revolution started from country rural regions, who are poor regions. How to meet with that people expectation? I think that we have to emphasize on education. Myself, I come from a rural and poor region in Tunisia, and I'm here thanks to education. So we have to emphasize on education. That's the point. Considering the role of the Constituent Assembly, I'm agreeing with you that Tunisians have so many expectations regarding this Constituent Assembly, but this assembly is a temporary one. I think it will last no more than 1 year. So we can't ask this assembly to do address problems like economic growth or unemployment. We have to be patient. We have to be patient. Maybe Mongi can address other questions.
Now, I'll say a few words. I'll try to be quick. I mean, all questions are coming back to the risks and challenges and the uncertainties. There are certainly risks, challenges, and uncertainties. Nobody is guaranteeing anything. But we're trying to, really make some expectation based on evidence and a more profound knowledge of Tunisia. It's true that it's not excluded that the assembly will break down, and they will keep fighting each other and cutting each other's throat. I mean, it's not totally excluded. But we have signals, serious signals, coming from those who are involved in the process, promising that this is not going to be overwhelming, because they will fight for a while, but they will end up making decisions and coming some real business. Because deep down, most of them belong to some homogeneous groups. And the willingness to change Tunisia is very strong. I mean, maybe one proof to give you the way the current commission, which is the substitute parliament we have, has been operated. It's true they fought a lot. The first day they met, they were about to kill each other. And the Ben Ashur, who is the chairman, was about to leave. He said, God damn, I'm sorry about that. I mean, he said, he was really mad, okay? He said, I'm not going to do the business. You are not serious, I'll leave. Everybody followed him, kept him, and they started doing business. So there is hope and there are fears. And most people, in fact, agree on the main things, and that's why we still we're not so afraid of it. Okay, we have also differences and fears because of the gaps between rural and urban, between youth and less young people. Not everybody understands what's going on. Not everybody has a clear perception. Not everybody trusts what is the process. But that will be dealt with if those who have the lead in the country, I mean, those have clear perception and have an idea and views about the future, who carry a vision, are capable of getting together and maintaining some cohesion. Will they work together? If they do, people will be secured. They will be will accept the future. And no matter what, I don't think in any country you've got 50 or 70% of the, you don't have 50 or 70% of the people who have only vague idea of what politicians do anyhow. So we are not claiming that everybody in Tunisia understands what's going on and is involved. And no, if we have 30% of the people who know what to do, that will be fine. So.
Steve, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll say a few words on the role of women. I very much agree with Chiheb's comments that I think there's a lot of positive signs about the role of women in Tunisia moving forward. One that I'll point to that a lot of you may be familiar with is this gender parity requirement on the electoral list, which is extremely progressive, extremely impressive measure. All of the electoral lists are required to have half women, whether they're party list or independent list, half the candidates have to be women, and they have to alternate in order on the list. So it has to be like a man, then a woman, man and woman, which is, I think is extremely progressive measure. I mean, some have sort of commented that, well, it's not going to wind up with 50% of the seats going to women because most lists have men at the top, and a lot of lists will only get in one candidate, and that's true. So it's not going to result in a 50-50 parliament. But if it results in 20% of seats in the assembly being women, I think that's more than we have in the Congress here. So I think it's so in general, I think there's lots of positive signs. Also, there are sort of natural tendency to fear that Nahda, the Islamist party, which is just sort of consensus is that it has the most support, and there's sort of this natural fear that Islamist parties automatically are going to undo women's rights. But I think Nahda understands that it operates in a society that has had women's rights for a long time, and there's been some very positive signs from Nahda as a party. They were among the very first parties to come out and publicly endorse this idea of the gender parity list, and they also are one of the parties that are putting a number of women actually on the top positions of their list, and there will be women from Nahda in the assembly. So on that point, I think I'm relatively positive. I won't go into detail on the other points. I agree with that. There are lots of concerns about failure. There could be real risk of not meeting the economic demands, especially in the countryside. I think we're going to have to hope there will be some continued patience, and that and also that the parties will recognize the importance of having to at least work together enough to show some progress.
Please let me add that the head of Nahda party list in Tunis is a woman, a pharmacist that don't wear hijab. It's a signal. Yeah.
Well, I know there are a lot of questions left from the audience, but we have come to the end of our time together. I want to thank the panelists for their presentations, and also say that as someone who has been, like Steve and Dan and a few others, have been traveling to Tunisia both before the revolution and afterwards, I'm very optimistic about the Tunisian character to find a way through these what are very complex challenges, but somehow that sense of solidarity pervades the society in a way. And that comment that Steve made about the mature way in which Tunisians are recognizing the challenges that they're facing is an asset to be invested in. And again, just to make the final point that the United States and others should really take advantage of the opportunity to invest there. So again, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming on this rainy day, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very much.